Hello again, my friends, and welcome to Carpo's channel. It's February 12th, 2019, and I thought that I haven't made a video in a few days, and I thought I'd make one this evening, and it is in honor of my father. And he passed away when I was about 15 years old. I believe it was about 1992. Now, he was born in 1949, and so he would have been 70 today. And looking back and thinking of how it's been 28 years and all the years missed with my father, I figured it would be a great thing and a great honor to make a video for him in his honor. And perhaps you'll do a toast with me if you're out there and you happen to drink maybe even apple juice or water. I would like to tell maybe a couple stories about my father and reminisce a little bit about him, but when I make a video talking about it, even though a lot of people aren't interested, I understand that. It's something that I believe when you put out good energy and think about these things, you know, it helps everyone to heal. And it took me a long time to realize how much I was actually, you know, damaged by my father dying. So I actually brought out this. I'm wearing this shirt right here. This is an original, like, I think late 70s or 80s plaid shirt that my dad bought, you know, and after he passed away I ended up getting it out of his wardrobe, and it's the only clothing item I still have. The elbows are completely gone. But, so I figured I'd wear it. I saw it there and I was like, yeah, I'll wear that while I make the video. The jacket is from my friend Scoey. Thanks, Scoey. I just put it on. I don't know why. Maybe the shirt wasn't warm enough in the cold garage because we've had a chilly weekend. But another thing that I have is this cup, which I don't think I've ever actually used. It says older than dirt. And I bought this for my dad when he was about 40 years old. I bought this cup for my dad when he was younger than me. And the interesting thing is that he passed away when I was about 15 and he was 42. And I'm 43 now, so I've actually am older than when my father passed away, and it really gives me a perspective on what it means to lose your life at a young age, you know. Older than dirt from my perspective as a teenager, maybe. So this cup is completely demolished, and it was up on the shelf, and it has a huge crack that runs all the way through it, and it was dripping, but I wanted to use it to kind of toast. And if any of you out there happen to have anything to toast with, it'd be nice. You're welcome to toast with me. This is some grape wine that a friend of mine, my buddy Space, made. And Space came and stayed the weekend with a friend of his, and they stayed for a couple days this weekend while we went to Dark Star Orchestra, which is a Grateful Dead cover band. And we had a really good time. And my buddy Scoey came over, and we stayed for the weekend. And the kids stayed at their grandma's, and we basically just hung out. And I worried about the weather because it was supposed to be a snowpocalypse, as they called it. But as it turned out, we got a lot of snow out here, but the roads were clear all the way to the first night and back, and it started snowing like crazy right after we got back. The second night, the roads were clear enough for us to get down there and back as well, and it ended up being, you know, it was meant to be kind of thing. So anyway, my buddy Space, when he came over, yeah, he gave me a couple of bottles of this wine for a bag of Kratom. We kind of made a trade. So thanks Space. Appreciate that too. As I can see that my patch job has failed on this cup. As I said, it was cracked, and I went over it briefly with a little bit of I used a glue gun, you know, and I thought, oh, that'll hold, but no, it's just dripping like crazy, so it doesn't really matter. Anyhow, so my father and I, you know, my parents got divorced when I was about 12, and my mom moved out, and I have a younger brother by 3 years, and he moved in with my mom in Oregon City. And my father and I moved to a place called Lake Oswego, which anyone who knows the area, that's kind of the yuppie zone of the Portland area, or one of them. And we were broke. He was a postal service worker. He carried mail. And we did what we could to survive, but we lived in a rich area, but in the poor part of it, called the First Edition. And our rent was only like $425 a month. So when I moved in there with him, I was about maybe 13. And briefly before that, and this is interesting, I had completely forgotten about this until just now. My dad and I moved from Hillsboro after my parents got divorced out to a house, an apartment in Oregon City. Honestly, I don't even remember the place. But I do remember the bully at the school picking on me the first week, and he was like, for no reason, never even met the guy. Somebody just told me that he wanted to kick my ass. And so, anyhow, I got there halfway through my 6th grade year. And so then we moved to Lake Oswego, and I ended up staying there with, meeting a few friends. All the friends I met, basically, my long-term friends, were mostly from Lake Oswego. And we were kind of the rebels of the town, if you will, hang out in the park and smoke pot. And my father, he loved to go camping. He was an outdoorsman. And so he would take our family out down to southeastern Oregon. It's through some, treacherous shit, man. I mean, the fucking Steens Mountain today are a gorgeous area that you can go visit. There's lots of parking lots and roads to the top. Back then, it was all dirt roads, and we went out to the Trout Creek Mountains near Nevada, Oregon, California border. That shit was fucked up. I mean, we had some serious problems out there with, it's like, what do you do? There's rattlesnakes and shit. Well, what happened was one time, my dad, we went with him, just my brother and I, with him, and I believe it was after my parents got divorced. I had to drink this before it just drips everywhere. It's just totally leaking out of the cup. Good excuse. So we go out camping, and in this place called the Trout Creek Mountains, and it's a little stream that runs through in the middle of nowhere, and it's about 12 hours from our house, in Portland, and it was probably several hours off the beaten path on dirt roads, and you come to this little oasis strip. This little snaking oasis next to the stream where there's on either side there's maybe 30, 40 feet of trees, and then it's just desert for miles. So we get there, we set up camp, we hang out for a day or so, and then all of a sudden my dad gets sick. And I still don't really recall what happened exactly back then. It was interesting, but he got sick, and he was in the tent, and as a father who's sick, I can't imagine what was going through his head as my brother and I went exploring. Even though I was 12, I'm sure he was worried as hell about us. So we went up to those mountaintops and went out. I found an old area where Native Americans had chipped away at this little white. It was like a white obsidian. But it wasn't until later when I pulled all these pieces and threw them in buckets and took them back and was selling them at a garage sale that somebody's like, do you know what you have here? Where is this spot? So hopefully one day I'll find it again. But anyhow, my brother and I went and collected a bunch of crystals and stuff, came back to camp, my dad continued. He was sick for a few days, really sick. And finally he felt well enough to drive back, and I don't think I understood the severity of the situation. But we started driving back, and he pulled over at some point and said he had to vomit. And he got out of the car, and the truck, whatever we had, and he just puked. He puked up this long, let's just say it was a banana-looking thing. Now, honestly, I know anybody's first thought is nasty. That's probably a parasite or a maggot, who knows, some kind of cocoon. I mean, it could be any of a million things. I really don't recall because it's easy to look back and have a false memory. We as humans we tend to mix things up and they seem more hardcore than they were. But the stories I've heard from my mom that he told her was he was worried about that too. But anyhow, within a couple of years after that, we found out he had cancer. Didn't know exactly why or from what, but he had carcinoma, which the doctor said was likely from him growing up in Chicago in a really polluted area, and then going to Vietnam, which my belief is that, let's just say the U.S. government, my own country, killed my dad. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure he was exposed to Agent Orange during his service in Vietnam. And the stories he told, about that place, it's just horrendous. But, like father, like son, his dad was in World War II. My other grandpa was in World War II. In fact, looking back, my brother and I are probably the first, sons in a while not to join any military because of obvious reasons. But so anyhow, yeah, after he passed away, it was kind of like my brother and I were on our own, and we were just little punk asses, and my mom had to take care of us, So, I'm really grateful that I grew up to be the person that I did, and that I'm not some asshole, because it's just as easy for a person to turn into a complete jerk because of the situation they encountered in their youth. And, I realize now that, honestly, when people say that they don't know who they are anymore, or somebody they know is anymore, that's no surprise to me, because I really believe that people change over time. It's only if we recognize the issues that we've had and our shortcomings, and the mistakes we've made, as well as kind of coming to terms with the losses we've had. For a long time after my father passed away, I didn't want to build any relationships with anyone. I didn't have a girlfriend all the way through high school. Well, briefly, a couple times, but it wasn't on my radar. And it really wasn't until my wife finally hit on me enough to where we got together. And 20 years later, we're still together, and I'm glad we are. And that's one of the beautiful things. It was like having people you love in your life is extremely important. When we see people die, watch them die, it can build a sort of resentment towards death, if you will. Then we are less likely to want to build relationships. And at least for me, that's what I've observed. And so for a long time I was very wary of people, and I've always been a kind of peace man, hippie mentality type of easygoing guy, where I'm like always trying to ease the tension and not get in an argument. But at the same time, if anybody's talking stupid shit, I'm always right there for an argument. Or if anybody's treating somebody else like shit, I'm right there to get in their face. Not to fight, but to make things right, if that makes sense. So anyway, I've always had this, kind of an attitude about things, and I think a lot of that stemmed from my loss of my father. I don't know. It's really hard to determine where we, got our demeanor, our attitudes, if you will. I had a guy the other day leave a comment on my channel here. It was something to the effect of like, why don't you get a job like the rest of the world instead of begging for money on YouTube and selling Kratom? And I said, well, and I explained my situation, and I said, it's hard when people don't understand where you're coming from and they judge you. I said, a lot of people don't know that I had sciatica for several years. Really fucked me up. Not just physically, but I realized mentally. I lost my career as a carpenter. I feel like I can never go back to it. And then finally, I made several videos about it. And I've had people still leaving comments on my sciatica videos saying, I have it now. How did you cure it? How did you get rid of it? And I said, I had to quit my career. But the thing is, a few years later, like 4 years later now, after I quit as a carpenter, I felt myself falling back into this back pain. And it just happened a couple days ago. I had this great weekend with my friends, and gradually my back was kind of hurting that weekend. And I had moved some stuff a few days before, not too much, but lifting and moving anything, even one thing in the wrong direction, it wears my spine down to the point where I can't lift anything for a long time. And I'll tell you, it really fucks you up. I mean, you're like, great, I'm useless. So when my son was younger, I couldn't even lift him up. And I thought, I'm going to be a crippled dad for life, and I'll never be able to lift my kids up. And I tell you, it broke my heart, but I fought through it, and I made it through. Sorry, I'm getting totally off track. The main point of that was that After the guy left that comment and I explained to him my situation, he said, I'm sorry I judged you, basically. That, he said, I guess I'm just jealous of your carefree lifestyle. And I thought about that for a minute. I thought about that for the last couple days, on and off. I'm like, do people really think that by watching my videos? That I have a fucking carefree lifestyle? I'll tell you. It's not just physical work or exertion or, that can break down your soul. The very existence of being, just being a husband and father of 3 kids and worrying about whether or not I'm making enough. The thing is, if you're not worrying about one thing, you're worrying about another. And I've learned to conquer stress in my life, but I also have this kind of attitude, this anguish towards certain, I don't like bullshit, I have a very low tolerance for bullshit. And so when people call me out on my bullshit, I'm cool with it. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't retort or try to get more to the point, but, nobody likes hearing criticism, but constructive criticism I have no problem with. So being human is a complex issue. The reason why I'm talking about my personality traits is, and how it relates to, I think, my father passing away, I kind of lost trust in people after that. And it's because you don't want to build too many relationships or be too connected to everyone else. You may end up losing more people. And that's what I was getting at earlier. You build more relationships and you lose them. And you're going to lose them. There's no way around it. Whether you die and they suffer or they die and you suffer. So let's move on to what we do about it. We have to come to terms with the fact that we will die and others will die. We don't know when or who. And if I get cancer, so be it. I'm determined to live to be 100. I always have been. I thought when I was younger, I was like, well, you got to set your sights on at least some sort of a goal. I was like, well, fine, I'm going to live to be 100. Regardless, I'll live to be 100. And I've thought about that on and off over the years. It's like, it doesn't really matter to me how long I live. I just don't want to leave those I love behind. And that's a really hard thing. So I guess when you think about it, maybe it's, because my father died and left us behind, that I'm so opposed to dying. Not because I don't want to lose myself, but because I don't want those around me to lose me. And that's kind of an epiphany for me, I think. It's like, sometimes I've thought my fear of death is any type of fear of death. I've conquered mostly my fear of death because that's something I've worked on for several years. The idea that to think about it regularly. In other words, I celebrate death, So, here's a celebration to my dad and his potential 70 years on Earth, but what ended up being only, 42. And everybody has their own perspective. Everybody has their own lives, their own choices. If my father's parents had moved out of polluted Chicago and my dad hadn't gone to war as a fool, then maybe we'd be better off now. Do I know? I don't know. And I don't speculate. I really don't think about how it could have been or would have been or should have been. Am I a believer in free will, determinism? It doesn't matter. None of that matters. What really matters is just living now. It really is important. But we're still going to be affected by those we've lost. So if I were to leave with some advice, or something to pass on out of this, it would be that we're all going to lose someone. And we'll be fortunate if we don't. And we'll be fortunate if we don't lose multiple people in our lives. And I'm sure every one of you out there has lost someone. And it's difficult. But when it's your father as a male, I don't know how different that is from, any other relative or situation. If I had a cousin die, I might feel bad briefly, but I'd get over it pretty quick. I thought about my father's birthday and how he'd be 70 today, and I thought about it several times throughout the day. And then, as I was in the kitchen and I was standing in the kitchen doing something, and I looked and I said to my wife, "Yeah, my dad would be 70 today." And then I just started crying, and that really hits home. I said, I don't even know where that came from. I mean, I'm an emotional person. When I think about my dad, I've cried several times, but it really made me realize how much we do suppress our losses. And, so I made this video to kind of give him a 20 minutes, if you will, because he'll never be here again. And I'm okay with that. But to also encourage others not to lose faith once they've lost someone. It happens, and we have to get over it. They would want us to. So, if you were to pass on, to ask yourself, what would you say to your loved ones if you were able to communicate with them one last time? In other words, if you died and you were a ghost and you were able to come back one time and talk to your loved ones, and when you came back you saw them grieving and crying, what would you say? And most people would say, don't worry about it, I'm gone. It's irrelevant. We cry for ourselves, we mourn for ourselves a lot. I understand that too, but I guess, for the most part it is mourning for ourselves, but we also mourn because that person never got to experience so much more awesomeness. And when it's a good person who just made some mistakes, or even if they just by chance lost out, it's hard. And it's especially hard when they're really young, too. I can't imagine. I know I have kids, and I understand the fear of losing them really young, and that would be a horrendous thing. And I know a lot of parents out there have. And, I remember when one of my wife's friends at work, her son, or daughter actually, was killed by a log at the Oregon coast. And she started this coalition to be aware of sneaker waves, what they call them, sneaker waves. They sneak up and, it's kind of like a rogue wave, a small but larger wave that goes way up the beach, and it'll catch logs where kids are playing around them and roll them over them. And kids have died that way. So she turned it into something positive, an awareness, campaign. But the reason why she was so inspired to do that is because she lost a child. And that's probably the most difficult thing any human can go through. I don't care how hard people have worked in their lives towards something and had failure or disappointment or depression about situation, but when it comes to our family, that's more than anything else, I don't know. I guess it's all perspective, but it's important that we are aware that losing loved ones, close loved ones, is probably one of the hardest things that we'll ever encounter. So if you're out there and you want to toast, hit pause on the video and then toast with me, and then I'll be gone out of your hair. So, this is a toast to Gregor Andrew Orr, born February 12th, 1949. Died at 42 years of age, would have been 70 years old today, and maybe that's older than dirt. Cheers. Thanks for listening to my story, and I wish you all well. Every flame is extinguished eventually. Everything comes and goes. So, I'll talk to you soon, and be well.